The morning Arizona sun cast long shadows across Nelly's Air Force Base as maintenance crews wheeled the wounded F-16 Fighting Falcon toward Hangar 7. Black scorch marks streaked its titanium belly like war paint, and hydraulic fluid leaked steadily onto the tarmac, forming dark pools that reflected the cloudless desert sky. The aircraft's engine had seized during a routine training sortie, forcing an emergency landing that left veteran pilots shaking their heads in disbelief at the narrow escape. Captain Rebecca "Torch" Caldwell stood in the hangar doorway, her weathered hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee that had grown cold hours ago. At 34, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had logged over 3,000 flight hours in everything from crop dusters to multi-million-dollar fighters. Her auburn hair, streaked with premature silver from years of high-altitude stress, was pulled back in the regulation bun that never quite contained the rebellious strands that framed her angular face. Dark circles under her green eyes spoke of sleepless nights spent poring over technical manuals and maintenance logs, searching for answers that seemed to elude everyone else. The other instructors had already written off the damaged Viper. Engine rebuilds were expensive, time-consuming, and rarely successful on aircraft that had seen as much combat as this particular bird. It had flown missions over Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria, accumulating battle damage and stress fractures that made it more museum piece than fighting machine. The smart money said it would be stripped for parts and sent to the boneyard within the week. But something about the way morning light caught the aircraft's scarred aluminum skin made Torch pause. She had always possessed an almost supernatural ability to read machines, to sense their hidden potential beneath layers of damage and neglect. It was a gift that had served her well during her combat deployments, where a pilot's life often depended on coaxing performance from equipment pushed far beyond its design limits. Major Patricia, Ice Queen, Henley emerged from the squadron-ready room, her pristine flight suit bearing the insignia of someone who had never seen real combat, but possessed all the political connections necessary for rapid promotion. She surveyed the damaged fighter with the casual disdain of someone accustomed to having problems solved by others. "If you can fix this engine," Ice Queen announced with a laugh that echoed through the hangar, "I'll give you my flight hours." The words hung in the desert air like a challenge, and every mechanic within earshot stopped what they were doing to stare at the two women. Ice Queen's logbook contained over 1,500 hours of pristine peacetime flying, accumulated through connections and careful career management rather than skill or dedication. Torch set down her coffee cup and walked toward the wounded fighter, her boots clicking against the polished concrete floor, with the steady rhythm of someone who had made a decision that would change everything. Lieutenant Sophia, Rebel Vasquez, had been at Nelly's for exactly 72 hours, and already she could feel the weight of every sideways glance, every whispered conversation that stopped when she entered a room. At 26, she was younger than most of the enlisted mechanics she would theoretically outrank, with a face that belonged in a magazine rather than under the hood of a $50 million fighter jet. Her Venezuelan heritage showed in her dark eyes and olive complexion, features that made her stand out in a squadron dominated by fair-skinned Midwestern farm boys and Texas oil field veterans. She had grown up in the shadows of her father's auto repair shop in East Los Angeles, where speaking Spanish was as natural as breathing, and every customer was treated like family regardless of their ability to pay. Miguel Vasquez had immigrated to America with nothing but calloused hands and an unshakable belief that any machine could be fixed if you understood its soul. He had taught Sophia to listen to engines the way other children learn to read, showing her how the subtle variations in sound and vibration could reveal problems that sophisticated diagnostic equipment might miss. The Air Force Academy had been a culture shock that nearly broke her spirit. For years of being told she was too emotional, too intuitive, too willing to trust her instincts over established procedure. Her classmates nicknamed her Rebel, after she was caught modifying her dorm room computer to run diagnostic software she had written herself, improving its performance by 30% in the process. The name was meant as an insult, but Sophia wore it like armor, using their mockery as fuel for the fire that burned inside her chest. Now she stood in the shadow of the damaged F-16, studying the engine compartment with the focused intensity of a surgeon examining a patient. The other mechanics had already given their verdict: catastrophic bearing failure, metal fragments throughout the lubrication system, compression ratios that made the engine suitable only for scrap metal. They spoke in the confident tones of people who had seen it all before, their expertise backed by decades of experience and training. But Sophia heard something different in the engine's silence. Where others saw destruction, she sensed potential. The damage was extensive but localized, contained within systems that could be rebuilt rather than replaced. It would require precision, patience, and techniques that existed more in the realm of art than science. Ice Queen's challenge still echoed through the hangar like a dare. 1,500 flight hours represented more than 2 years of additional training, enough to accelerate Sophia's career by half a decade if she could prove herself worthy of the opportunity. She reached into her tool bag and withdrew a small flashlight, its beam cutting through the shadows of the engine compartment like a sword through darkness. The next 6 hours passed in a blur of controlled chaos as Sophia disappeared into the mechanical maze of the F-16's power plant. Her hands moved with surgical precision, removing damaged components and cataloging each piece of debris with the methodical thoroughness of someone who understood that success lived in the details. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the hangar's air conditioning, but her focus never wavered from the task at hand. Other mechanics drifted over throughout the day, drawn by curiosity and skepticism in equal measure. They watched her work with the detached interest of spectators at a car accident, waiting for the inevitable moment when she would admit defeat and walk away from the impossible task. Some offered advice that ranged from helpful to condescending, while others simply shook their heads and returned to their own assignments. Technical Sergeant Mike "Wrench" Patterson had been turning wrenches on Air Force fighters since before Sophia was born. His weathered face bore the scars of countless encounters with unforgiving machinery, and his reputation for diagnostic accuracy was legendary throughout the squadron. He leaned against a nearby workbench, arms crossed over his barrel chest, watching the young lieutenant work with the calculating gaze of someone sizing up an opponent. "Kid's got heart," he admitted to nobody in particular, his voice carrying the gravelly texture of too many cigarettes and not enough sleep. "But heart don't fix blown bearings." Sophia pretended not to hear the comment, but her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly as she continued her systematic disassembly of the engine's core components. Each removed part was cleaned, inspected, and either set aside for reuse or marked for replacement. The pile of salvageable components grew slowly but steadily, defying the predictions of those who had written off the entire power plant as beyond repair. By late afternoon, word of the challenge had spread throughout the base like wildfire. Off-duty personnel found excuses to wander through Hangar 7, creating an informal gallery of observers who pretended to be there on official business while actually watching Sophia work. The atmosphere carried the electric tension of a prizefight, with whispered bets being placed on whether the rookie lieutenant would succeed or fail spectacularly. Ice Queen made periodic appearances throughout the day, her presence adding an extra layer of pressure to an already impossible situation. She never spoke directly to Sophia, but her silent observation felt like a weight pressing down on the younger woman's shoulders. As the sun began to set over the Nevada desert, Sophia finally stepped back from the engine compartment, her uniform stained with hydraulic fluid and her hair escaping from its regulation bun in defiant wisps. The damaged F-16 sat silent in the gathering darkness of Hangar 7, its engine compartment illuminated by harsh fluorescent work lights that cast sharp shadows across the complex machinery within. Sophia had been working for 14 straight hours, sustained by nothing more than determination, and the occasional sip of water from a bottle that someone had thoughtfully placed within reach. Her hands were steady despite the exhaustion that pulled at her shoulders like an invisible weight. The crowd of observers had grown throughout the evening, transforming from casual spectators into an invested audience that seemed to understand they were witnessing something significant. Even the night shift mechanics had delayed their own work to watch the young lieutenant attempt what everyone agreed was impossible. The air hummed with whispered conversations and the distant sound of aircraft launching into the darkness for night training sorties. Technical Sergeant Patterson had positioned himself at the front of the informal gallery, his skepticism gradually giving way to something that might have been respect. He had seen enough engine rebuilds to recognize genuine skill when it revealed itself, and Sophia's methodical approach was beginning to impress even the most hardened veterans. Her diagnostic techniques were unconventional but effective, relying on intuition and sensory perception rather than purely technical analysis. "She's actually doing it," whispered Airman First Class Tommy Rodriguez, his voice barely audible above the ambient noise of the hangar. "Look at those compression readings." Sophia had connected a portable diagnostic computer to the engine's sensor network, and the numbers displayed on its screen told a story that defied conventional wisdom. Where catastrophic failure should have been evident, she had found a path to resurrection through careful attention to details that others had overlooked. Each bearing had been individually assessed, cleaned, and either retained or replaced with surgical precision that minimized the scope of necessary repairs. The work required not just technical knowledge, but an almost mystical understanding of how machines lived and breathed. Sophia's father had taught her that engines possessed souls, that they communicated their needs through subtle changes in vibration and sound that only the most sensitive mechanics could perceive. It was a philosophy that had no place in military technical manuals, but it guided her hands as she coaxed life back into components that others had declared dead. Ice Queen appeared at the edge of the crowd just as Sophia began the delicate process of reassembling the engine's core components. The Major's expression remained carefully neutral, but something in her posture suggested that her earlier confidence was beginning to waver. 1,500 flight hours represented a significant investment in time and resources, and the possibility of losing them to an untested lieutenant was becoming uncomfortably real. The reassembly process required absolute precision, with tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch and torque specifications that allowed no margin for error. Sophia's movements had taken on an almost ritualistic quality, each action performed with the deliberate care of someone who understood that a single mistake could undo hours of painstaking progress. As midnight approached, the hangar had taken on the atmosphere of a cathedral, with hushed voices and an almost reverent silence that seemed to acknowledge the significance of what was unfolding. The moment of truth arrived with the mechanical precision of a countdown timer reaching zero. Sophia stepped back from the reassembled engine, her tools arranged on a nearby cart, with the same obsessive organization that had characterized her entire approach to the seemingly impossible task. The F-16's power plant looked identical to how it had appeared 14 hours earlier, but appearances could be deceiving in ways that only a true mechanic could understand. She reached for the engine start controls with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly, the first sign of nervousness she had displayed throughout the entire ordeal. The crowd pressed closer, their collective breath held in anticipation of either triumph or devastating failure. In the harsh fluorescent lighting, every face reflected the same mixture of hope and skepticism that had defined the day's proceedings. The starter motor engaged with a high-pitched whine that gradually built to a crescendo before settling into the rhythmic pattern that preceded ignition. Sophia's eyes remained fixed on the diagnostic display, watching as temperatures, pressures, and flow rates climbed toward their operational parameters. Each number that appeared on the screen represented vindication for techniques that existed more in the realm of intuition than established procedure. The engine caught with a roar that shook the hangar's steel framework and sent a shockwave of sound through the assembled crowd. But mechanical noise was only the beginning of the story being told by the diagnostic equipment. What mattered were the numbers scrolling across multiple screens, painting a picture of an engine that was not merely functional but performing within specifications that defied every prediction made by more experienced mechanics. Technical Sergeant Patterson stepped forward to examine the readouts more closely, his weathered face reflecting disbelief as he absorbed the implications of what he was seeing. Compression ratios, bearing temperatures, and oil pressures all fell within acceptable ranges, suggesting not just a successful repair, but a resurrection that bordered on the miraculous. "Son of a bitch," he muttered, his voice barely audible above the engine's steady idle. "She actually did it." The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause that echoed through the hangar like thunder, but Sophia barely heard the celebration. Her attention remained focused on the diagnostic displays, searching for any sign of instability or impending failure that might transform triumph into disaster. The engine continued to run with the smooth reliability of a Swiss watch, its sound patterns indicating healthy operation across all systems. Ice Queen pushed through the crowd with mechanical determination, her face a mask of controlled emotion that revealed nothing about her internal response to the evening's developments. She had made a bet that seemed safe at the time, never imagining that an untested lieutenant might possess the skills necessary to accomplish what seasoned professionals had declared impossible. "Impressive work, Lieutenant," she said, her voice carrying the flat tonality of someone delivering a prepared statement. "I'll have the paperwork transferred by morning." 1,500 flight hours would change Sophia's career trajectory in ways that extended far beyond mere numbers in a logbook. The weeks following Sophia's engine resurrection passed in a blur of newfound respect and carefully managed expectations. Word of her achievement had spread beyond Nellie's Air Force Base through the informal network of mechanics, pilots, and maintainers who formed the backbone of military aviation. She found herself fielding calls from other bases, requests for consultation on particularly challenging problems that had stumped more experienced personnel. But success brought its own complications. The nickname Rebel had evolved from mockery into a badge of honor, though Sophia sensed that some of her colleagues still harbored doubts about her unconventional methods. She had proven herself capable of achieving the impossible, but military institutions valued predictability and established procedure over individual brilliance that defied easy categorization. Captain Torch Caldwell had become an unofficial mentor, recognizing in Sophia the same intuitive understanding of machines that had defined her own career. Their conversations took place during quiet moments between training flights, discussions that ranged from technical specifications to the broader philosophy of mechanical empathy that separated true craftspeople from mere technicians. "You have a gift," Torch told her during one such conversation, as they watched the sunset paint the Nevada desert in shades of orange and gold. "But gifts can be burdens if you don't learn to manage them properly. The Air Force needs people like you, but it doesn't always know how to use them effectively." Sophia nodded, understanding the implications of what her mentor was trying to convey. Military culture rewarded conformity and predictable results, values that often conflicted with the intuitive approaches that made her most effective. She would need to learn how to package her abilities in ways that satisfied institutional requirements while preserving the essence of what made her unique. The modified F-16 had become something of a legend within the squadron, consistently outperforming other aircraft during training exercises and maintenance inspections. Pilots who had initially been skeptical of the rebuilt engine now requested it specifically for challenging missions, trusting in the mechanical integrity that Sophia's work had restored. The aircraft's performance metrics spoke for themselves, validating her methods in ways that silenced most remaining critics. Ice Queen had fulfilled her promise to transfer the flight hours, though the transaction had been completed with minimal fanfare and no acknowledgement of its significance. Sophia now possessed the credentials necessary for advanced training opportunities that might have taken years to accumulate through normal channels. But she had learned that political considerations could be as important as technical competence in determining career advancement. The base commander had taken notice of Sophia's achievement, scheduling a brief meeting that felt more like an evaluation than a congratulation. Colonel Marcus Hawk Davidson was a career officer who had risen through the ranks by making safe decisions and avoiding unnecessary risks. He studied Sophia with the calculating gaze of someone trying to determine whether she represented an asset or a potential problem. "Your work on that F-16 was impressive, Lieutenant," he began, his tone carefully neutral. "But I hope you understand that such unconventional approaches can't become standard operating procedure. We have regulations and protocols for good reasons." Sophia understood the subtext of his words, the delicate balance between recognition and warning that characterized most interactions with senior leadership. The training schedule had intensified following Sophia's demonstration of mechanical prowess, with assignments that seemed designed to test her abilities under increasingly demanding conditions. She found herself working on aircraft that other mechanics had given up on, problems that required the same combination of technical knowledge and intuitive understanding that had made her engine rebuild possible. Each successful repair added to her growing reputation, while simultaneously isolating her from peers who struggled to understand her methods. They respected her results, but remained suspicious of approaches that seemed to bypass established procedure in favor of techniques that existed more in the realm of art than science. Sophia found herself caught between worlds, accepted but not fully integrated into the community she desperately wanted to join. The loneliness was perhaps the most unexpected consequence of her success. Achievement had brought recognition but not friendship, professional respect but not personal connection. She spent her evenings alone in her quarters, studying technical manuals and writing detailed reports that documented her methods for future reference. The reports were as much for her own understanding as for anyone else, attempts to translate intuitive knowledge into language that others might comprehend. Torch had warned her about this aspect of exceptional ability, the way that being different could create barriers even among people who valued your contributions. "Excellence can be isolating," she had said. "People admire what they can't understand, but they don't always feel comfortable around it." Sophia was beginning to understand what her mentor meant, feeling the weight of expectations that came with being seen as someone who could accomplish the impossible. Every problem that crossed her desk carried the assumption that she would find a solution, regardless of how challenging or unprecedented it might be. The pressure was building towards something that felt like a breaking point, though Sophia couldn't quite identify what form that crisis might take. The crisis arrived on a Tuesday morning in the form of an emergency scramble that shattered the routine of what had promised to be an ordinary training day. Sophia was performing routine maintenance on a newly arrived F-16 when the hangar's PA system crackled to life with the urgency that immediately commanded every person's attention. "All maintenance personnel to Hangar 3 immediately," the voice announced. "Priority Alpha situation." Priority Alpha meant catastrophic mechanical failure, the kind of problem that could ground entire squadrons and trigger investigations that reached the highest levels of command. Sophia abandoned her current task and joined the stream of mechanics, technicians, and supervisors converging on the designated hangar with expressions that ranged from curious to deeply concerned. The scene that greeted them defied easy comprehension. Captain Jessica Phoenix Martinez stood beside her F-16 in full flight gear, her face pale beneath her helmet as she gestured toward the aircraft's engine compartment. Black smoke still wisped from various openings in the fighter's fuselage, and the acrid smell of burned electronics hung in the air like a funeral shroud. "Complete electrical failure at 15,000 feet," Phoenix explained to the growing crowd of maintenance personnel. Lost all primary systems, backup power, everything. Had to dead stick it back to base on pure mechanical controls. Dead stick landings in modern fighters were the stuff of legend, requiring skills that few pilots possessed and luck that couldn't be manufactured. The fact that Phoenix had managed to bring the aircraft home safely spoke to both her exceptional ability as a pilot and the fundamental soundness of the F-16's design philosophy. But the underlying cause of the failure remained a mystery that threatened to ground the entire squadron until answers could be found. Colonel Davidson appeared at the edge of the crowd, his expression carrying the weight of someone facing a potential career-ending crisis. Electrical failures of this magnitude were rare enough to trigger mandatory investigations by teams of specialists from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, processes that could take weeks or months to complete. In the meantime, similar aircraft would remain grounded as a precautionary measure, effectively eliminating the squadron's operational capability. Technical Sergeant Patterson stepped forward to begin the initial assessment, his movements carrying the careful deliberation of someone who understood that every action would be scrutinized by investigators. He connected diagnostic equipment to various access points, while other mechanics began the systematic process of documenting the scene for official reports. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered after reviewing the initial readouts. "Multiple system failures but no obvious cause. It's like everything just died simultaneously." Sophia observed the proceedings from the edge of the crowd, her mind automatically cataloging the symptoms and searching for patterns that might reveal the underlying problem. The simultaneous failure of multiple independent systems suggested either an extremely unlikely coincidence or a single point of failure that affected everything downstream. Her instincts told her that the answer lay hidden in the details that others might overlook. The investigation would follow established protocols that emphasized thoroughness over speed, systematic analysis that might eventually identify the root cause, but could take weeks to complete. Sophia understood the necessity of such procedures, but she also recognized their limitations when dealing with problems that existed outside the bounds of normal experience. She studied the damaged aircraft with the same focused intensity she had brought to the engine rebuild, searching for clues that might be invisible to conventional diagnostic approaches. The breakthrough came not through sophisticated analysis, but through careful observation of a detail so small that others had dismissed it as insignificant. Sophia noticed a slight discoloration around one of the aircraft's grounding points, a subtle change in the metal's appearance that suggested electrical arcing under conditions that shouldn't have been possible. She knelt beside the suspect connection and examined it more closely, noting the telltale signs of electrical damage that extended beyond what would be expected from normal operational stress. The grounding system was designed to prevent exactly the kind of cascading failure that had occurred, but something had compromised its effectiveness in ways that weren't immediately obvious. "Sergeant Patterson," she called, her voice cutting through the ambient noise of the investigation. "I think I found something." The senior mechanic approached with the measured steps of someone who had learned to be skeptical of easy answers, but his expression changed as he examined what Sophia had discovered. The damaged grounding point told a story of electrical discharge that violated basic assumptions about how such systems were supposed to function. "Son of a bitch," he whispered, echoing his reaction to Sophia's earlier achievement. "How did you spot that?" The discovery shifted the entire focus of the investigation, transforming it from a mystery without clues into a targeted analysis of a specific component failure. Sophia's observation provided the key that unlocked a chain of causation leading back to a manufacturing defect in a batch of grounding straps that had been installed months earlier. The defect was subtle enough to pass initial quality control inspections, but severe enough to cause catastrophic failure under the right combination of circumstances. Colonel Davidson's relief was visible as the investigation team confirmed Sophia's findings and identified the scope of the problem. Instead of facing an extended grounding of his entire squadron, he was dealing with a targeted replacement of defective components that could be completed within days rather than weeks. The difference between the two scenarios could be measured in millions of dollars and potentially compromised national security. "Outstanding work, Lieutenant," he told Sophia during a brief ceremony that felt more genuine than their previous interaction. "Your attention to detail probably saved lives today." The commendation would go into Sophia's personnel file, adding another layer to a reputation that was beginning to attract attention from far beyond Nellie's Air Force Base. But more important than official recognition was the shift in how her colleagues viewed her contributions to their shared mission. Technical Sergeant Patterson pulled her aside after the ceremony, his weathered face showing an expression that might have been paternal pride. "Kid, I've been doing this for 25 years, and I've never seen instincts like yours. You don't just fix machines, you understand them." The words carried weight coming from someone whose opinion was respected throughout the maintenance community. The months that followed Sophia's diagnostic breakthrough established her as the unofficial specialist for problems that defied conventional analysis. Her reputation spread through channels both official and informal, creating a network of contacts that extended far beyond her immediate assignment. Requests for consultation arrived from bases across the globe, each one representing another opportunity to apply her unique combination of technical knowledge and intuitive understanding. But recognition brought its own challenges in the form of expectations that seemed to grow with each successful resolution. Sophia found herself assigned to increasingly complex problems, situations where failure could have consequences that extended far beyond mere mechanical inconvenience. The pressure was constant and unrelenting, a weight that pressed down on her shoulders during every waking moment. Captain Torch Caldwell continued to serve as mentor and confidant, helping Sophia navigate the political complexities that accompanied her rising profile within the Air Force hierarchy. Their conversations had evolved beyond technical discussions into broader explorations of leadership, responsibility, and the burden of possessing abilities that others couldn't fully comprehend. "Excellence is a double-edged sword," Torch observed during one such discussion. "It opens doors that would otherwise remain closed, but it also creates obligations that you can't easily escape. People will depend on you to solve problems that others can't handle, and that dependency can become a prison if you let it." Sophia understood the wisdom behind her mentor's words, recognizing the truth in observations born from years of experience. She was beginning to feel the weight of being seen as someone who could accomplish the impossible, a reputation that created expectations which might eventually prove unsustainable. The squadron's operational tempo had increased significantly following the electrical failure investigation, with training exercises that pushed both equipment and personnel to their limits. Sophia found herself working extended shifts to maintain aircraft that were being stressed beyond normal parameters, each inspection revealing new problems that required her particular brand of mechanical intuition. The F-16 she had originally rebuilt continued to outperform expectations, serving as a testament to the effectiveness of her unconventional methods. Pilots competed for the opportunity to fly the aircraft, trusting in its mechanical integrity despite knowing that its restoration had defied every expert prediction. The fighter had become a symbol of what was possible when established limitations were challenged by someone willing to think beyond conventional boundaries. But symbols carried their own burdens, and Sophia was beginning to understand that her association with the rebuilt F-16 created expectations that extended beyond mere mechanical competence. She was seen as someone who could breathe life into machines that others had written off, a reputation that brought both opportunity and pressure in equal measure. The base commander had begun including Sophia in briefings that were normally restricted to senior officers, seeking her input on maintenance issues that could affect operational readiness. Her presence in these meetings represented a significant departure from normal protocol, recognition that technical expertise could be as valuable as rank or experience when dealing with complex challenges. Ice Queen had maintained a careful distance since their initial encounter, neither acknowledging Sophia's achievements nor creating obstacles to her advancement. The transfer of flight hours had been completed without drama, but the Major's silence spoke volumes about her feelings regarding the unexpected outcome of their informal wager. Sophia sensed that bigger changes were coming, shifts in assignment or responsibility that would challenge her abilities in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The summons to Washington, D.C. arrived without warning on a Thursday afternoon, delivered by a courier whose credentials suggested connections to levels of authority that made base commanders seem like middle management. Sophia was ordered to report to the Pentagon within 72 hours for meetings that were described only as consultations regarding specialized technical capabilities. The language was deliberately vague, but Sophia understood that her reputation had reached the attention of people who made decisions affecting national security at the highest levels. The prospect was both thrilling and terrifying, representing an opportunity for advancement that could accelerate her career beyond her wildest dreams while simultaneously creating pressures that might prove overwhelming. Captain Torch helped Sophia prepare for the meetings with the careful attention to detail that characterized all her mentoring. They spent hours discussing not just technical subjects, but the political dynamics that governed high-level military decision-making, the subtle requirements of briefing senior officers who valued confidence and clarity above elaborate explanations. Remember that these people aren't mechanics, Torch advised. They understand results, not methods. Focus on what you can accomplish, not how you accomplish it. Save the technical details for people who can appreciate them. The flight to Washington took Sophia across landscapes that seemed to represent the vast scope of the country she served, from the Nevada desert through the farmlands of the Midwest to the political centers of power that shaped national policy. She spent the journey reviewing her achievements and preparing for questions that might probe not just her technical capabilities, but her potential for handling responsibilities that extended far beyond routine maintenance. The Pentagon proved to be even more imposing than she had imagined, a monument to military power that dwarfed every other building she had ever entered. The corridors seemed to stretch for miles in every direction, filled with officers whose insignia represented levels of authority she had previously encountered only in textbooks and training manuals. Her escort was a colonel whose specialty remained deliberately undefined, a man who spoke in the measured tones of someone accustomed to dealing with classified information that could affect global stability. He guided Sophia through security checkpoints and identification procedures that seemed designed to emphasize the serious nature of her visit. "Lieutenant Vasquez," he said as they walked through corridors lined with portraits of military leaders, "your reputation has reached some very important people. They're interested in discussing opportunities that could benefit both your career and national security interests." The conference room where the meetings took place could have accommodated 50 people, but only 6 chairs were occupied when Sophia entered. The officers seated around the polished mahogany table represented branches of the military she hadn't known existed, specialists in areas that remained classified even after introductions were made. General Patricia, Iron Lady, Harrison dominated the room through sheer presence, a woman whose career had been built on making decisions that affected millions of lives. Her silver hair was pulled back in a style that emphasized the sharp intelligence in her gray eyes, and her uniform bore decorations that spoke of service in conflicts that had shaped modern history. "Lieutenant Vasquez," she began without preamble, "we've been following your work with considerable interest. Your methods are unconventional, but your results are undeniable. We have some challenges that might benefit from your particular talents. The projects they described existed at the intersection of mechanical engineering and national security, problems that required not just technical competence, but the ability to think beyond established limitations. They spoke in general terms about aircraft that pushed the boundaries of current technology, systems that demanded maintenance approaches that existed more in the realm of art than science. Sophia listened with growing excitement and trepidation, understanding that acceptance would transform her career in ways that could never be reversed. The classified briefing that followed stretched Sophia's understanding of what was possible in military aviation, revealing projects that seemed to belong more in science fiction than the real world. The aircraft she was being asked to maintain existed at the cutting edge of technology, pushing performance envelopes that created stresses no conventional fighter had ever been designed to handle. The stealth characteristics that made these aircraft nearly invisible to enemy radar also created unique challenges for maintenance personnel. Traditional diagnostic equipment was often ineffective due to the electromagnetic properties of specialized coatings and materials, requiring approaches that relied more on sensory perception than electronic analysis. It was exactly the kind of problem that Sophia's unconventional methods were uniquely suited to address. General Harrison outlined the scope of the assignment with the clinical precision of someone briefing a surgical team before a complex operation. The aircraft in question were prototypes of systems that might determine American air superiority for decades to come, but their experimental nature made them prone to failures that defied conventional troubleshooting approaches. "We need someone who can understand these machines intuitively," she explained. "Someone who can sense problems before they become catastrophic failures. Your work at Nellie's suggests that you might be exactly what we're looking for." The offer came with benefits that staggered Sophia's imagination: immediate promotion to captain, assignment to a facility that existed officially only in the most classified Pentagon budgets, and access to technology that represented the future of military aviation. But it also meant leaving behind everything familiar, entering a world where her achievements would never be publicly acknowledged, and her failures could have consequences that affected global stability. The decision required her to weigh ambition against comfort, the unknown against the familiar. Sophia found herself thinking about her father's auto repair shop, the place where she had first learned to listen to machines and understand their needs. Miguel Vasquez had taught her that every engine possessed a soul, but he had also warned her that some souls were more demanding than others. "I need some time to consider the offer," she told the assembled officers, knowing that such requests were rarely made in rooms like this one. General Harrison nodded with what might have been approval. "24 hours, Lieutenant. The projects we're discussing can't wait for extended deliberation." Sophia spent that evening walking through the monuments and memorials that filled Washington, D.C., trying to process the magnitude of the opportunity she had been offered. The Lincoln Memorial and Vietnam Wall seemed to whisper stories of sacrifice and service, reminding her that individual ambitions were meaningful only in the context of larger purposes. She called Captain Torch from her hotel room, seeking advice from the mentor who had guided her through every previous crisis. Their conversation lasted nearly 2 hours, covering not just the immediate decision, but the broader implications of choosing a path that would define the rest of her career. "You have to follow your instincts," Torch finally advised. "The same intuition that helps you understand machines can guide you in understanding yourself. What does your heart tell you about this opportunity?" Sophia knew the answer before the question was fully asked, recognizing a truth that had been building within her since the moment she first heard General Harrison's offer. The acceptance meeting lasted less than 15 minutes, but its consequences would echo through Sophia's life for decades to come. General Harrison received her decision with the satisfied expression of someone whose judgment had been vindicated, while the other officers began discussing logistics with the efficient precision of people implementing plans that had been prepared well in advance. "Welcome to the most challenging assignment of your career, Captain Vasquez," the general said, using Sophia's new rank for the first time. "You'll report to Groom Lake in 2 weeks for orientation and initial briefings. Everything else you need to know will be provided once you arrive." Groom Lake, Area 51, the most classified facility in American military aviation, a place that existed more in legend than public knowledge. Sophia felt a thrill of excitement mixed with apprehension as she contemplated working on aircraft that most people would never see or even know existed. The return flight to Nellie's gave her time to process the magnitude of the change she had committed to making. Below her, the American landscape scrolled past like a map of possibilities, each region representing different choices she might have made and different lives she might have lived. But the path she had chosen felt right in ways that transcended rational analysis, aligning with instincts that had never led her astray. Captain Torch was waiting when Sophia's flight landed, her expression mixing pride with concern in proportions that spoke to their deepening friendship. They drove back to the base in relative silence, both understanding that some transitions required contemplation rather than conversation. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of paperwork, briefings, and farewell gatherings that felt more like wakes than celebrations. Sophia's colleagues understood that her new assignment would take her beyond their ability to maintain contact, into a world where even acknowledging her existence might violate security protocols.